All right. We seem to have most people online now. So hello and welcome everyone to Holistic Grazing for Soil Carbon with Brian Wehlburg. Welcome back to our partner landholders, to our broader AgriProve community, and to any newcomers who are joining us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which I stand, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And a reminder to everyone that we are recording today, and we will put this webinar up on our YouTube, our website, and our social media channels. So we would love to see your faces. So if you could please have your cameras on, but please remain on mute until question time. So my name is Melanie Adensel and I work with AgriProve as Innovation Project Manager. I look after our trial work, our research projects and partnerships, and our business development projects. So as many of you know, AgriProve partners with landholders to enable them to participate in the Australian Government ACCU scheme to sequester carbon in soils and to generate carbon credits. We now have over 700 projects on the books and have generated nearly 19,000 ACCUs. So AgriProve is hosting this webinar because we know that in grazing operations, strategic and careful grazing management is fundamental to sequestering carbon in soils and to keeping it there in the long term. And we've started to see some good results come through from our trials and our landholders who are using holistic planned grazing. And we're really keen to promote these practices to our broader AgriProve community. So today we are absolutely delighted to host Brian Wehlburg, Australia's leading holistic management educator, to talk to us about how you can use holistic planned grazing to increase soil carbon, productivity, and importantly, soil health. So a very warm welcome to you, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you.
So a bit of background on Brian. Brian is a holistic management educator. He's certified with the Savory Institute and the Holistic Management International. He's also a board member on Holistic Management International and the Australian Holistic Management Cooperative. Brian's originally from Zimbabwe in Africa, where he was trained as a holistic management educator by Alan Savory himself. Brian brings a lifetime of experience in managing grazing operations in Africa, southwest Queensland and New South Wales. And as a consultant, a grazing consultant and educator where he's worked across Australia, New Zealand and internationally, delivering holistic management education through his business inside outside management. And I was lucky enough to complete Brian's course a couple of years ago, and it is truly one of the best courses I've ever done, not only for the grazing management strategies that build resilience in the farming system, but also the use of the holistic management framework to manage complexity in any business, as well as in your broader life. So today we'll have about 40 minutes of presentation, then we'll have some question time. So if you could please hold your questions until the end, and please be sure to keep yourself on mute for the presentation. So with that, Brian, it's wonderful to have you here today. I'll hand over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Melanie. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, got you loud and clear.
Fantastic, fantastic. Again, thanks very much for the team at AgriProve, the wonderful team at AgriProve for this opportunity to have a chat and have you on and hopefully share some ideas. Personally, I'm really excited about the times we live in at the moment. I think we're starting to uncover a lot of the answers to many of the big pressing problems that we have all around the world, literally, whether it's biodiversity loss, whether it's desertification and desert spreading, whether it's carbon loss, and right down to human health issues. And so I think it's a really exciting time where we're starting to uncover some of the answers. And again, huge opportunity, especially for landowners, for farmers, because we actually hold the secrets and the answers in our hands, so to speak. So again, huge opportunities for us, and again, really exciting time. Before we tap into a couple of things and a little bit of a PowerPoint slide, I just wanted to have a chat about some of the elephants in the room. And again, often these elephants inhibit our ability to change and to learn new things. And I'm sure just looking at a couple of names on the screens here, most of us are well along that journey of creating change, and we certainly need to create change. But when we consider the whole population of Australia, there's certain beliefs, ideas, paradigms that limit their thinking, limit their ability to change, limit their ability to see beyond what they're currently doing. So, appreciate I'm preaching to many of the converted, but we all have connections through people we sell to, people we source suppliers from, and again, we really need to be getting the broader public on board with the changes that we can do on our properties to sequester carbon, to build biodiversity, and just change that thinking. And I think someone famous once said, we'll never solve the problems using the thinking that created them in the first place. So we really need to get the larger community at large changing. So one of the first elephants I just want to have a quick chat about, and I'd never heard of it until I actually came to Australia 20 odd years ago, and we'd been in central Queensland for a couple of weeks, and my son came back from school one day and announced to me, he said, Dad, Australia never had hard-hoofed animals, and they're bad. And I had to kind of think for a minute and think, well, okay, and I thought for a moment, and I could envisage all those pathways under the fence that I saw from the kangaroos, bare eroding pathways under the fenceways where they always go through. And again, kind of thinking, well, hold on, that's certainly non-native, and they certainly don't have hard hooves. And then it kind of also took me back to, we've all seen backyard chickens where they've taken that environment and basically turned it into concrete. And again, certainly not hard-hoofed animals. And then we've all stood on the back door of a home somewhere, and we've observed that bare eroding track from the back door to the hills hoist. And once again, certainly are not created by hard-hoofed animals. I always like to say, unless you've got a forked tail. So again, that paradigm around hard-hoofed animals being bad for the environment, it's not the hard hoofs at all. It's how they're managed and the time component. I always take myself back to walking along the beach, and I'm afraid I'm a bit of a plodder on the beach. So when I look at my footprints on the beach, I just see compaction, compaction, compaction. And if I cast my eyes across the sand, I'll see the footprints of a jogger. And again, exactly the same foot structure, the same bones, the same muscle, well, maybe not the same muscles, but the same sort of muscles and the same sinews, etc. Virtually the same foot, certainly not hard-hoofed, but a jogger has a very different impact on the beach. The big toe digs in, creates a bit of disturbance, breaks through any capping, makes a bit of a divot where water might sit for a bit longer, some seed might fall in there and germinate, some litter might be incorporated into the ground. So again, this paradigm that hard-hoofed animals are bad is just that, it's a belief. And again, it limits a lot of people's ability to see the opportunities of change. The second sort of probably the bigger elephant in the room actually is the whole methane question. And I always like to take it back. Plants evolved on this planet about 800 million years ago, and they evolved almost simultaneously with animals. And we're talking very simple sponges here. And grazing animals as we know them today literally evolved 300 million years ago, and they evolved with the plants that those grazing animals ate. So the plants and animals have evolved together over millions and millions of years. We didn't suddenly have plants and suddenly have animals, or vice versa. We had animals and suddenly had plants. They've evolved over millions of years together. And we don't have lots of plants and few animals, or vice versa. If you had a drought or a fire or a flood or a catastrophe, and we had fewer plants, you have fewer animals. They die and die and die, sadly, and vice versa. So plants and animals have evolved over millions and millions of years. And then one day, around about 5,000 years ago, a human domesticated a couple of wild animals. And suddenly from that, we've evolved this belief that these animals are the root cause of climate change, that are the root cause of basically the risk of destroying civilizations as we know it on the planet. These animals have evolved literally for millions of years together. And now suddenly, on some day, 5,000 years ago, suddenly those animals that were wild and got domesticated were now suddenly going to become the cause of, catastrophic failure for the planet. And again, you just got to sort of, I shake my head and think, what the hell's going on? It just doesn't make sense to me at all. What happened when we took those wild animals and domesticated them? We changed management, not the animal. And so today we still have the potential to use those animals for good, and they're just a tool, and we can use them for good, or we can use them like the backyard chickens to actually destroy environments and reduce soil carbon and all those bad things. So, the methane again is a big question. And again, just recently Ireland's announced that they're looking at culling 200,000 cows to keep in line with their carbon emissions and global agreements. And literally, the world needs more animals. We need animals to cycle those nutrients, to put them back in the soil so the plants can access them, to cycle the carbon, put it back in the soil. Because if plants are left, in most of the world, if they're left standing upright once they senesce or die, they tend to turn grey and oxidize, which means that carbon's going back into the atmosphere and not into the soil. So again, animals are critical because they've evolved with plants. And that cycle of methane, whenever you break down that long chain molecule of 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens, whenever you break down that molecule in the absence of oxygen, you form methane, CH4 instead of CO2. And so that cycle of plants and animals and methane has been going on literally for 300 million years. Why suddenly on one day, 5,000 years ago, when we domesticated an animal, did it suddenly become an issue? It's taken our eye off the ball, I think, largely. So governments are passing strange policies like culling their cow herds, and we spent millions of dollars in this country trying to get cows to eat seaweed to try and reduce their emissions. So anyway, that's another elephant in the room that again I believe most of us have seen past that one. And then the final one is this concept of severe grazing. I'm always seeing pictures and presentations where people say don't take more than a third of the plant, etc., etc. And I've opened the gate for my own animals, and literally you open the gate, within 2 steps or 2 seconds of those animals walking through the gate, I see my best chicory plant or my best plantain or my best panic, and the cow chews it right down to the ground within 2 seconds of them being in the paddock. And again, there's a lot of research saying don't take more than a third of the plant because the plant takes longer to recover. But the reality of management is, how do you stop these large grazing animals chewing plants right down to the ground? It's impossible. You can't stop them. And you often hear people say, oh, well, we just take a third. And 99% of the plants in the paddock, they may just take a third by some strange way, but there'll be 1% that they take right down to the ground, and they always will, and we probably don't even see those plants. But those plants are going to take longer recovery. They're going to take longer to recover the energy, not just for themselves, but for that environment. And if we don't give them that recovery time, then those plants are often overgrazed and disappear. So, again, this paradigm against severe grazing, you literally cannot stop it. And we need to manage for those plants that are severely grazed. And, it may just be 1 or 2 plants in the paddock, but if they disappear, often what replaces them are weeds or less desirable species, and the productivity of your whole paddock starts reducing. Again, just some of those broad sort of paradigms or elephants in the room that often hold people back and stop them exploring new ideas and new ways. There are a couple more, but I think those are the three main ones that we often hit our heads against. So I'm just going to share a quick PowerPoint here. Again, just delving into some of those ideas, but really now focusing on, what is holistic planned grazing and where did it evolve from? I know Savory, once he'd come up with some of his ideas around grazing animals and their relationship with predators and how they fitted into a whole functioning environment, was still seeing huge problems with management and farmers and their families, where farmers were going broke and things weren't working, even though they might be doing some great stuff for their land. in terms of whole life values weren't really working. So he went around looking for something that could manage complexity. And let's face it, farming's got to be one of the most complex businesses there is. You're at the cold front, you're out there with the weather, temperature, humidity, storms, fires, droughts, floods, and all those microorganisms in the soil. We are managing them. We can't just flick a switch and have some aircon. So let's just go on to a presentation quickly, and hopefully I can make that work for all of us. So just hold your horses for a tick. We had to practice this a few times before we came on, so I'm hoping it's going to work.
Yep, we're seeing it perfectly there, Brian. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for that feedback, because I can't see you anymore, but that's okay. So again, Alan Savory, fellow Zimbabwean, and developed a decision-making process called holistic management, which is what we're rolling out. And a component of that is holistic planned grazing. And again, as I said earlier, the idea behind that was to manage the huge complexity that land managers have to deal with, especially when we start dealing with animals. We're using the animals as a tool to sequester carbon, to build biodiversity, to improve the water cycle, to make creeks flow clear again. And so we're using that animal as a tool, but it needs to be at the right place, at the right time, for the right reasons, and often with the right behavior. And one of the problems with livestock as a tool, you can't just go and take them and park them in the garage and turn the key and switch them off overnight. They're out there 24 hours a day doing stuff. And either they're improving environments, depending on the way they're managed, or they're destroying environments, depending on the way we manage them. And again, it's our management that we need to get a handle on, because those animals are part of that environment and have been for literally 300 million years. The thing that's changed is the management. So again, just the complexity of managing land and managing farms. There are so many factors. We often fill up a couple of sheets of factors that influence management of land and management of stock, from predators to worms to flooding. Your wedding anniversary. Where do you want to be when your children's birthday is happening? Do you want to be in the yards processing animals, or do you want to be down at the creek having a picnic? So all of these things, operations, medical emergencies will impact your management on the land. And how do we as humans manage this huge complexity, which is not only massive, but also dynamic, constantly changing? This year we have rain, next year we don't. This year we have floods, next year we have drought. How do we manage that dynamic complexity that we're dealing with? Because we have to. And what I find, and it's just part of being human, I often ask people if they stood at the race and I asked them to count the cows, the heifers, and the calves coming down the race simultaneously. They can't do it. I can't do it. I can't stand on the side of the highway and count utes, buses, and trucks coming down the highway simultaneously. That's just three things. And as a manager of animals and farms, we're dealing with way more than just three things, and we can't do three. So that's where Savory went and tied up with the British military at Sandhurst and utilized one of their processes to help simple soldiers make decisions in stressful battle conditions. One of the first components that Alan Savory had to change was in the military. Literally, the decision had to be made and implemented within seconds, because that's battle conditions. Whereas with grazing, Alan had to extend it over, weeks, months, or possibly even years. So that developed into our holistic planned grazing, which, as I said, allows animals to be used as a tool, a positive tool, and allows us to manage this huge complexity of managing land, managing animals, and managing people, of course. We don't manage farms without connecting with other people, and whether it's just your family or it's your suppliers, your customers, they all form part of that complexity of decision making. So grazing management and holistic grazing management allows us to manage complexity. It allows us to get the animals to the right place, for the right reasons, and reduces stress not only on your animals, but also on yourself. You have a plan and you can work towards it. So a couple of those features of holistic planned grazing. And the first one, just a quick mention on, we talked about giving plants recovery. You can't stop plants being severely grazed, but you manage time. You open the gate, you close the gate. So you manage time for exposure of those plants to the grazing animal. You open the gate, you close the gate. And just a couple of quick slides here on that. And, what does recovery look like and how long does it take and what does it depend on? So the easiest way of sort of getting a handle on that is looking at the leaf volume or the solar panels of the plant. And let's say there's your plant. It's the best, juiciest plant in the whole paddock. And your cow's probably going to eat it within 2 steps of moving into the paddock. And that cow will chew that plant right down to the ground. And then depending on a whole range of factors, temperature, humidity, sunlight intensity, age of plant, number of earthworms in the soil, microbes in the soil, fungi, all of those things, after a certain time, that plant will recover its solar panels. And that's the best indicator we have of that plant has now recovered its energy. And once again, it's not just the energy for the plant, it's energy for all life. It's energy for the earthworms, the microbes, your cows, your sheep, as well as yourself and your family. All energy comes through green plants, and through our management, we can either allow for recovery or regrowing of those solar panels, or we can either come back too soon or stay too long and cause overgrazing, which reduces the energy in that environment. And that's what we call recovery period. So allowing your plants adequate time to recover. And once again, I often hear farmers say, we move every day, or we get around in 60 days, or something like that. And again, that's a system. This is dynamic. Every day is different. This week might be hot as hell and dry, and next week might be cold and damp. And your plants are going to respond differently. So the idea behind holistic planned grazing is we make a plan, and then success really lies in that constant monitoring, because change is the norm. So places I've managed from Africa, the recovery periods from Africa to central Queensland to on the coast in New South Wales have varied tremendously. So in Africa, we're working somewhere between 150 and 40 days. In central Queensland, we're up to 180 and 30. And on the coast here, we started at 60 and 90 and then very quickly developed a 120 day variation, because it depends on a whole range of factors. And we can take a guess and then monitor accordingly and make those changes and adjustments. Because if you don't, you'll end up damaging plants, reducing energy in the environment, reducing the amount of carbon those plants can suck out of the atmosphere and put back into the soil through root exudates, dunging, urinating, trampling. So just a couple of slides here again from central Queensland. 8th of November, really hot, stinking hot, steamy. Had a really good break to the season. Here we are 4 days after the start of the season, and that is a Panicum maximum green panic plant. And as you can see, it's just starting to take off. Great soil cover there. And all I've done is just step in and I've grazed by hand that one plant in the middle there. And so there it looks. A couple of seconds later, I've taken all the solar panels off it and then just monitoring it to see how quickly those solar panels come back. So that's the 8th of November. As I said, really hot, humid, sticky. Plants are growing like the clappers. And there's day 1, virtually no change. Day 2. By day 3, that plant is almost grazable. In fact, it probably is. So if you'd left your animals in that paddock at that time for 3 days, they would be coming back and regrazing plants that were initially grazed. So again, in some parts of the country, recovery can be immensely quick, and other plants, it could take months. And our job as managers is to manage for that, and we open the gate, we close the gate. That's our job. Otherwise, we run the risk of overgrazing, which is going to reduce soil carbon. It's going to reduce energy in that environment and obviously lead to biodiversity loss and dropping of energy. And there we are 4 days after that graze. Practical ways to measure recovery. Again, very difficult to walk into a paddock and say, ask yourself the question, has it recovered? Because you really need to have something to compare it against. What was it like when it was initially grazed? Were the plants this high, or were they 6 inches, or were they 2 foot high? So a lot of people today use exclusion cages. I use these IBC cages around the IBC tanks, the 1,000-litre IBC tanks. Again, they're pretty good steel, they're easy to move around. And literally just before the cows come into the paddock, pop the cage on plants that they're going to severely graze. Okay, so in this case, I popped them on some kikuyu and paspalum here. The animals have come in and had a chew around the cage. You can see the plants on the outside of the cage have all had a chew. I've moved the cage on. Oops, sorry. I've moved the cage on, so you can see these plants around the marker. They haven't been grazed this time, but the ones on the outside there, you can see they've all had a chew of. Now, again, depending on temperature, humidity, sunlight intensity, the number of earthworms in the soil, the fungi-bacteria ratio, all of those things is going to determine how quickly those plants recover. And so we take a guess, and as time passes, at some point in time, the volume of leaf on the outside and on the inside of those plants where they weren't grazed is virtually the same. And at that point, we can assume that the energy in that environment is back. And again, it's not just energy for the plants, it's energy for everything. Every living thing needs energy through photosynthesis, including yourself and your family. So those cages are, again, a really simple way to measure, has recovery occurred and has the energy come back into those environments. So again, recovery of plants essential in our planning, but it's another bit of complexity that we have to add to our planning, because we've already got a pretty full book there. And once it's recovered, again, we can come back and we can graze it. Don't leave the cage in the same place all the time. Keep it moving around, but always put it on top of plants that are going to be severely grazed. It's a nice and easy way of looking at recovery. The other tool our animals give us, so your animals give us 2 tools. They give us grazing, which we manage time. You open the gate, you close the gate. And the other tool is what we call animal impact. And that's the dunging, the trampling, the urinating, chipping of soils, all those cool things. And for that, we generally manage time as well as density. So again, here we are in central Queensland, some buffalo country. We've got a couple of hundred japocs in the paddock, and I'm sitting at the water trough. We've started the season, had a good shower of rain. The plants are starting to take off. We've got a couple of hundred animals coming through that narrow gateway to get a drink, probably twice a day. We're going to incur some trample. And again, often the paradigm around trample is it's a very negative thing, but if well managed, it can be extremely stimulating and good for environments. So there we are 2 days later, and again, often people say, oh, we've done some damage. But as long as we manage time, if we allow for recovery of plants and soils, where is the best plant growth? Where's the most nutritious plants? Where's the best plant spacing? Right there where it got hammered the most. And again, at some point in time, we're going to have to get those animals back into that paddock. And again, they're going to create a lot of trample. And as long as we allow recovery, once again, where is all the best, sweetest, juiciest, most dense plants? It's right there where it got trampled the most. So trample can be a very valuable tool, but it has to be managed. We've all seen tracks down to water holes where the animals aren't managed and they just track day after day after day. We need to make sure that we limit the time that occurs. Otherwise, we're using animals in a negative way. Another point there, if I said to you, what is all that green stuff? Some of the more observant people might say, oh, it's buffalo grass. Yes, it is. But what actually is it? It's all sequestered atmospheric carbon. plants take up virtually no carbon from the soil to grow. It all comes out of the atmosphere. So the plant sucks up the carbon. We then trample, dung it, urinate it back into the soil, and the plant sucks up more carbon out of the atmosphere. And so when we look all around the world, grasslands, in association with those large herds of animals, are our biggest carbon storages around the world, whether it's the prairies, the steppes, the pampas, the savannas. Those animals, in combination with those plants, help those plants become just carbon pumps, sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, pushing it into our soils, creating immense wealth and biodiversity in the soil, where we've often ignored it because we don't live in the soil. We certainly don't farm in the soil. And I often pull people up because they kind of say, oh, that country's no good, wasn't a tree in sight. And, we have focused on the trees, and I love trees. But, when you can put 6 billion organisms in a cup of good soil, and here we are focusing on one tree, soils can be massive reserves of biodiversity. And somehow we've tended just to focus on a tree. As I said, I love trees. Trees are great. They're great for biodiversity. But we haven't looked under the soil as much as we should, because there's huge biodiversity under good, healthy soils with good plants and good animals above it. So again, those animals are giving us two tools, and we need to plan for recovery. We need to plan for animal impact when we want it, but it requires a plan. It's another aspect of managing livestock, and that is a hugely complicated business, and therefore we need tools to help us manage that complexity, because as humans we don't do complexity well. So planned grazing allows us to plan for getting the animals to the right place at the right time for the right reasons. This is just another gateway, and again, just getting that concept of allowing time for recovery, time for those plants to suck carbon out of the atmosphere, sequester it in their roots and their hypocotyl, and then putting animals in to trample, to dung, to urinate, and to push that carbon back in the soil. So here's just a narrow gateway. We've got 250 steers coming through there, and then we allow recovery. At some point in time, those cows are going to have to come back through that gateway again, and then we allow recovery. And again, at some point in time, depending on temperature, humidity, all those factors, and we allow recovery. And each time you see that recovery, the volume of green leaf, the volume of energy is getting larger and larger and larger. So at some point in time, when the system shuts down because it becomes too hot, too cold, too dry, too something, we've now got a haystack of good quality feed out in the paddock to allow us to sustain our animals over that period when we don't have as much green leaf capturing sunlight. So again, allowing for recovery from both grazing and trampling. Okay, so we really need those animals. They've evolved together with biodiversity. They've evolved over literally 300 million years with those plants. And at some point in time, we took those wild animals and we domesticated a few, and we've changed the management. We don't need to change the animal, we need more animals. I drive around a lot of Australia and I see literally kilometers after kilometer of grey oxidizing grass that desperately needs to be pushed down into the soil to allow that nutrient, that carbon, to go back into the soil. Because if it's left standing and we see it starting to turn grey, it's a clear indicator that that nutrient and that carbon is going back into the atmosphere. So we can use animals, our livestock, to make those changes. So when I look at soil like this, and this was just on the roadside outside Orange, if this was in our garden, we would probably chip it up, loosen it up, we'd get all that grey stuff on the ground, and it would come back. Can we do that with livestock? Absolutely. And you might want to chuck a bale of hay in there, or you might want to get the dogs to get them to mill around in there, or just bunch them with a temporary fence. And they let them chip it up, dung it, urinate it, but then we need to manage. We need to make sure that there's enough recovery time from both, in this case, the trample, but if the plants start growing and we graze them, from recovery of plants' recovery of energy. So that's what holistic planned grazing does. It also allows us to manage all those other complexities. How do we do it? We use a grazing chart. There's a lot of software available today to do it as well, and some of it's pretty good. But what I find generally with most farming businesses is the problems are normally associated around communication and creativity. And I'm convinced that a family sitting around a piece of paper with a pencil saying, what if we move the cows from this paddock to this paddock, or what if we move them from here to here, that stimulates communication, it stimulates creativity. Where often I find one person pushing buttons on a computer, that tends to shift our thinking towards logic. 1 + 1 is 2. And our creativity drops, but also often it's not a good communication tool. That's just my personal opinion. Lots of people are using software and having great results with it. Of course, the other benefit of using a piece of paper, it costs me $2.50 twice a year. So huge benefits of a piece of paper. And again, gives us the opportunity to literally put down all those other factors. When you're away on training, I've got a Y chromosome, so I always forget my wedding anniversary. But ever since I've started putting my wedding anniversary on my grazing chart, I've never forgotten it. My kids' birthdays are all on my grazing chart, and a lot of other information. Rainfall goes on the grazing chart. When certain flowers come out in the paddock, when certain trees come into bloom, just about anything you can think of that might be important, you can pop it down on the grazing chart, as well as all the calving, processing, branding, weaning, all of those factors. In central Queensland, we put down all our machinery. So again, when the bulldozer got serviced, when the utes got serviced, when the 4x4s got serviced, every member of staff had a row on the grazing chart. And when they went away on leave, when they went on courses, was all on the grazing chart. So the grazing chart really can become that great communication tool, but also a planning tool that everybody can visit. If you put it up in the workshop, the whole team, the whole family, all your employees can actually see what is going on the farm. So it's just a fantastic tool, and for $2.50 or whatever, you can get them printed off at Officeworks. A great tool to be doing planning, to manage complexity, but then also to communicate and to stimulate creativity. The thinking behind it is what we call an aid memoir. Alan Savory kept the terminology to acknowledge the roots of the planning process coming from the British military. They called it the aid memoir. And again, it's a step-by-step process because humans are really good at step-by-step, and it allows us to manage complexity. Just to finish off, again, the grazing planning. Here's the holistic management framework. The grazing planning, if you can look, it's the second line down the bottom. It's right at the bottom. It's just a process that allows us, using certain tools, principally animals and grazing and impact, to manage our environment, to build our environment. But it's all about creating a vision for yourself to begin with. People without vision tend to focus on the problems, the weeds, the pests, the drought, the floods. Holistic management allows us to create a really strong vision for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, and the environment that allows us to make decisions towards that. Again, as someone famous once said, we need to go to the top of the mountain and see the land of promise. And people with a good, powerful vision, a positive, powerful vision, I always seem to think will do the impossible. They will take whatever's thrown at them and they'll make a positive outcome of it. So again, thank you very much for tuning in today. I'm going to shut down the PowerPoint, and I think we can open it up to a chat.
Thank you very much, Brian, for that really insightful and interesting presentation, and for introducing us to the new paradigms of holistic management. So we now have about 20 minutes for question time. If you could please raise your hand. There's a raise button in the top panel there you'll see, and then I'll call on you to unmute and ask your question. So we do have one in the chat already. So do you have a template for this grazing chart, Brian, that you could share with the folks today?
Absolutely, no problem. So I think, Melanie, you can put people in touch with me, or go onto our website, or yeah, just drop me a line and I'll be more than happy to share with you. More than happy. Yep. And we've got a couple of YouTube clips as well on our site, taking people through. So it's a bit of a sit. It's I think an hour and 15 to go through the 14 steps of the process. So it's me just talking us through, going through the steps and allowing you to complete the chart. So absolutely no problem at all. Yep.
Terrific, thank you. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in from the floor, I do have one which I get asked quite a lot. So there's a lot of debate around that intensity and the density of grazing, from the sort of older views of, only take a third, trample in a third, through to you should completely graze it, have the stockyard density as tight as possible. So from what you said earlier, it sounds like you're on the more intensive side. Is the higher intensity grazing always better? And how does that vary across climates and landscapes?
Yeah. Simple answers from my experience, absolutely. The more density you can get, I mean, you're just using a bigger hammer, you can achieve it faster. My experience in Zimbabwe and Africa, we ran our stock all behind a single wire electric temporary, but we had about 10,400 paddocks, and we moved between 40 and 80 times a day. So we had a mob of, we started off with 183 head, and in 4 years we had that up to 650 head. We reduced our feed bill from 2.5 kgs to 150 grams of just a mineral lick. Predation virtually stopped. There were no ways the leopards were going to leap into a mob of 650 cows. And just, the rivers started flowing again. We switched off troughs. I mean, it's, if you want to go hard, fantastic. Do you have the resources to do that? And so in Africa, labor was plentiful and cheap. So 85% unemployment or something like that. So, we had the resources to do that. But in terms of actual physical resources, it was just a couple of rolls of poly. And it was all in the wildlife area, so I didn't want any permanent fencing anyway. But that really high density, I think, played a major part in it. And I think parts of up North Queensland, we've got people moving, 4,500 cows every day kind of thing, building a new paddock with Kiwi tick fencing. And just about all of them reporting better time management. So we think it's, I think often when we think about moving stock, it's a lot of yeehaw and dust and what have you. But once those animals become programmed, they move really easy. And, there's technology coming about, and, I'm really excited about the possibilities of virtual fencing. Again, I think that's going to be quite a game changer for us. And again, that's developing. I think a lot of people are looking at virtual fencing, especially non-farmers, because again, through their vote, through their buying power, they have influence, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing governments, state governments, not okaying virtual fencing because I think they see it as, poor old cow's got this great big thing around its neck, and it gets a shock. Is that being humane? But if it's ultimately producing more biodiversity, more stability, more resilience in the landscape, it can certainly be a good thing. So I think technology is going to evolve with that. It's a new mob on the market, I think, called Halter, New Zealand crowd, and again, they've got some really good videos on it. But it's evolving, and if we can manage those animals better, for me, the bigger the hammer, the more impact we have. But there's certainly times when you don't need that density. I mean, if you're hoping for trees to come up and get more diversity of trees coming through, again, you probably wouldn't want to use that. So again, it's just a tool. Identify what your problem is in terms of landscape function, and if you need a big hammer, go hard. I also find the shape of paddocks really important, and sort of the concept I've kind of labelled it maize grazing, but I'm sure lots of people are doing it. But yeah, long skinny paddocks give you a much better animal impact as opposed to grazing. So the longer, the skinnier the paddock, the more animal impact, the more trample you get. So if you want to increase trample, the shape of the paddock is really important. We've always gone for kind of square paddocks because financially that's the most financially efficient shape for fencing. But with temporary fencing today, we can make paddocks any shape we want. So long skinny paddocks tend to give us more of that trample if that is what is required. So yeah, it's just a tool.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Brian, for that. And if you could also please just stop sharing your screen, that'd be great. Another question, unless there's, I've just got a question in the Q&A. We will absolutely be sharing Brian's contact details, and you can also Google him. His website is Inside Outside Management, so you can call him direct. So then another sort of question which comes to mind, how does it work in droughts, and what are the ways that you can manage reserves for drought, and how do you get it working in terms of getting those perennials and that diversity going in drier landscapes? Will it work, and how does that work?
Yeah, again, really interesting. I was talking just a couple of weeks ago. We were in California, very Mediterranean, very dry environment, and people there were really struggling to get perennials, but some of them were starting to make that happen. And again, just trying to say to them, maybe a little bit more patience, and hey, you're using a tool. Can we use the tool differently? More density or longer recovery periods? Let's give it a trial. And I think fellow educator Graham Hand came up with some really great ideas, and he calls them safe to fail trials, where literally jam animals in a tiny area for a couple of hours while you're going to have a breakfast or something, and then just leave that as a trial area. In terms of your productivity of your land, it's not going to make a huge difference. It's certainly not going to put the animals back. I mean, we put them in the yards for 2 days, just an hour or two inside the paddock or overnight inside this little temporary area, and then lock it up and just see what happens. And again, it's a really powerful way for you to see what's happening on your land. I think farmers have virtually given away the right to trial stuff on their places. We've given away the governments, we've given away companies, corporations, and every farm's different. Every paddock's different. Everybody's herd's different. And so being able to trial things and see them, whether they work on your place or not, is really, really important. But we need to be able to do it in a way that's not going to cost an arm and a leg. So fencing off these little areas, jamming the animals in there for an hour or two or overnight. And Graham Hand calls them safe to fail trials. They're just a fantastic way of you, the landholder, the decision maker, running a small trial in your place to see what is possible. And so I find those to be really valuable for getting change to happen. Managing drought, again, part of the planning process is really focused on drought. And living in Australia, but Africa was the same. I mean, we have to plan for drought because literally every second year is going to be a drought. And often what we find is people tend to lock up country as a drought reserve. And often what happens there is the plants, the nests, they start becoming grey, oxidized, and they lose value. And again, they lose carbon because that as soon as the plant turns grey, we know it's pushing carbon up into the atmosphere. So the process of planning for drought in holistic planned grazing is we, rather than lock up an area of land, which then may start becoming grey and oxidized, we reserve time in all paddocks. And that has many benefits. The first one, obviously, is we're not resting land to the point where it becomes oxidized. The second is if the rains come when you expect them, which might happen 50% of the time, often all that feed in that paddock that you've locked up goes to waste, because if you've got a green pick and now that's last year's feed that has had rain on it, your animals generally won't even look at it. They'll be busting through your fences to get the green pick. If you've just left thyme in all paddocks, generally what you're leaving behind is your worst quality feed. And say if the rains come when you expect them, you're not paying that high price by wasting a lot of good quality feed. When you lock up a paddock, you're reducing the number of paddocks available for management. And it's, the more paddocks you have, anybody who's increased their paddock numbers, suddenly you've got more opportunity to manage all that complexity of planting trees, fixing fences, putting in new troughs. Where do you want your animals to be when you go on holiday? In a paddock that's got plenty of food, plenty of water, good fencing. So the more paddocks you have, the easier it is to factor in all those management ideas. And if we're locking paddocks up for a drought that may occur 50% of the time, again, it limits your capacity to be flexible. So the idea behind managing drought in holistic planned grazing is, rather than lock up a paddock or an area, or another option, we'll always put hay bales away, is to reserve time in all paddocks. So you'll just leave a bit of feed in every single paddock. And if the rains don't come when you expect them, then you go back through all the paddocks again and just pick up that feed. And often it's your worst quality feed, but hey, we're going to drought. And so, hopefully through your management, that feed starts getting better and better as we go, but it will be your poorer quality feed, but it's a drought reserve.
Yeah, terrific. No, that's a really clever strategy there, Darren. So we do have one question come through in the chat. So what is the soil vegetation sequestration rate required to balance out the methane from the herd? And at what stocking rates does this even out?
Again, I'm not even going there. There's research come out of Sydney Uni. If you've got good, healthy soil, you will have free-living soil fungi, bacteria that will sequester all the methane your cows can produce. So again, it's about having a healthy environment. And the more plants you have, the more animals you have, the more methane you produce. Okay? But the more plants you have, the more carbon it's going to suck up the atmosphere. That cycle's been going on forever. I can only hope at some point in time we start ignoring methane, because it's a myth. We don't have animals if we don't have plants. We don't have plants if we don't have animals. And anytime you break down that building block of life, C6H12O6, in the absence of oxygen, you form methane. So I think 11% of the world's methane comes from termites, because they take that material down into their holes and they produce methane. Natural methane comes from swamps, wild animals. Any wild animal, kangaroo, wallaby, elephant, takes in organic matter, breaks it down in their stomach anaerobically, will burp and fart methane. About 13% of the world's methane comes from rice paddies, because we flood rice paddies, all that organic matter breaks down anaerobically. So those cycles have been going on, with the animal and the plant forever. We really need to be focusing in other areas. We need more animals, we need more plants, absolutely. But the methane's just part of that cycle. And methane breaks down really quickly in the atmosphere. Yes, it is apparently, 24 times more damaging in terms of its effect, but it breaks down literally within 12 to 20 years or something, whereas your CO2 will be up there for thousands and thousands of years. So really, I don't even worry about the methane. It is something that obviously policy has to deal with. It's something that you guys are going to have to deal with. But as a farmer and as a landholder, we want more cows, more animals, more biodiversity, more soil carbon, and your animals are a tool to achieve that.
So we do, as part of our soil carbon projects, we do a carbon intensity assessment, and a couple of our projects who have successfully generated carbon credits have shown that they are beyond carbon neutral. So all of their emissions and their methane through their soil carbon sequestration, they are reaching well beyond carbon neutral. So it's incredible to see what you can do when you really utilise your soils as a carbon sink.
I think also, when we use animals as a tool, I always refer back to Joel Salatin. They're solar powered, they reproduce themselves, they appreciate on your books. Try and do that with a tractor. So when we use an animal as a tool, it's solar powered. So when we use animals to get on top, animal impacts and grazing to get on top of weed issues or gully issues, and people are doing amazing stuff using animals as a tool. The New South Wales Fire Department now has had a trial now running for several years using goats to reduce fire hazard. And again, it's just a fantastic. I mean, it's just doing an amazing job. I drove past there a couple of weeks ago, and they were cleaning up along the railway lines. And so they've got this huge mob of goats, and it would have been 50 meters either side of the railway line, just moving the Tebbury fence down the railway line, and just absolutely stunning. I mean, the soil was covered, it was, the plants were growing, it was just amazing. Whereas traditionally, either we waited for it to burn from a big fire, or people were using fire as a reduction tool. The goats were doing, I think, a far greater benefit of pushing that carbon into the soil than a fire reduction burn, which would have put more of that up in the atmosphere. And then obviously, when we burn plants, that ash often either blows away or washes away. And so at least with the goats, they're pushing and dunging and urinating it, that carbon's getting back into the soil where it needs to be. So using animals as a tool as opposed to a lot of the other tools that are available to us, again, is often really positive for sequestering. But the issue is the methane, and we've got to overcome that one, because honestly, it's been going on for 300 million years. Why on some day, a couple of thousand years ago, did it become an issue? It just doesn't make sense.
Terrific. Thank you, Brian. We are fast running out of time, so we better wrap it up there. But thank you so much, Brian, for your time today, for sharing your wisdom and insights with us and giving an introduction to holistic grazing. So a few key take-homes. Managing grazing is about having livestock in the right place, the right time, the right reasons, and with the right behaviour. Manage for plant recovery, and overgrazing is leaving animals in for too long or coming back too early. And that wonderful piece you said about, people with a powerful vision will always achieve the impossible. So some really great gems there, Brian. To let everyone know that Brian does offer a full 8-day holistic management course and also a shorter 3-day holistic grazing course. He's got the full course coming up in Cooma, Burrawa and Albury in the coming months. We're going to send out a survey to everyone who attended the webinar today. If you are interested in doing further training with Brian on holistic management, please put in your details and we'll consider putting together a group. Brian's kindly offered to do some group discounts for us, so that might be available as well. So Brian, if you could give us your 30-second pitch on the holistic management course and also the shorter grazing management course.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. So again, the 8-day course, we break it down to two-day sessions. I always find, we used to do 3 days, but 3 days is too long. After 2 days, farmers are kind of looking out the door, wondering if their cows are still in the paddock or if grandma's still looking after the kids or they've run away. So we break it down to 2-day sessions, and we cover certain components of the learning in each session. And then the nice thing is people go back to their farms, to their situations, and implement, learn, make mistakes, have some successes. And then at the start of the next 2-day session, which will be 4 or 5 weeks later, we spend quite a lot of time just analyzing and asking questions and sharing that learning. So at each session, we have that feedback. And one of the most powerful things that we try to get from the courses is at the end of the course, that group continues to meet as a support mechanism for learning, because literally the minute someone says, yep, I've nailed this, I've got it, you will start failing, because everything's changing. So being able to meet with a group of like-minded people after the training and continue that learning process and supporting each other is really important. So I think the 8 families, which is a Soils for Life group, they've been meeting now for 18 or 19 years, every 6 weeks or something. They're just amazing. And largely their success comes to getting together as a group of like-minded people. And I think generally farmers today have become more isolated. We don't go to the pub after a cattle sale. We just don't share stories like we used to. So that's a major part of the training. So once the 8 days are completed over 3 or 4 months, it's getting you together in groups to support each other. If I'm in the neighborhood, I'll pop in and join the chat. But really, it's about you supporting each other to create the community. The 8-day grazing school is really just focused on grazing and some of the environmental literacy behind holistic management and looking at environments holistically rather than picking components of it. And it is sprinkled with lots of hooks to sign up to the 8-day, because ultimately every square inch of ground that you look over, that you drive over every single day in Australia, is the result of human decision making. And I haven't met a single farmer who wakes up in the morning and says, I'm off to go and destroy my farm. But when you think about it, we all do it, and it's decision by decision. So to me, the decision making is what holistic management's about. It's allowing us to manage that huge complexity of environment, people, and finances. So the 8-day one for me is what holistic management really is about. It's about good decision making, and that impacts every square inch of ground. So yep, that's about it, I think.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Brian. And a quick shout out that AgriProve, we do have our internal Carbon Builders community. We run that as a Facebook page at the moment, but we're really trying to build that peer-to-peer learning within AgriProve registered landholders as well. So we will have to wrap up, but finally, just a note, if you are new to AgriProve and you would like to find out more about participating in Carbon Project, please give us a call on 1300 GO SOIL, and we'll work with you on how we can tailor a carbon project for your property, and we'll compile this into a tailored carbon ready report. You can also go onto our website and download an info pack and watch the Soil Carbon 101 webinar, which we hosted a couple of weeks ago, which is on our YouTube channel. So again, Brian, thank you so much for joining us today, for giving us an introduction to holistic grazing, for your really insightful wisdom, and for opening our eyes to that paradigm shift of holistic grazing. Thank you everyone for joining, for taking the time to join us today, and for working to improve your soil carbon sequestration, turning your soils into a carbon sink, and playing a key role in climate change mitigation. So we'd love to keep in touch with you. So please reach out to myself and the AgriProve team if you'd like to continue the conversation, and also feel free to reach out to Brian directly if you would like to learn more about holistic management. With that, I'll call it to a close. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.